Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, the number of female lawmakers across Africa has reached historic highs, but there is still a long way to go. We take a closer look at the influence of the women who've made it into parliament on the continent. Also, it's in the past. The US and the African Union say that they have moved on from President Trump's slur about Africa made earlier this year. It comes as Secretary of State Rex Tillerson continues his tour of the continent. And finally, we hear from Seun Kuti, the youngest son of Nigerian afrobeat legend Fela Kuti. He tells crowds in Paris about his philosophy of music and life as he plays at the Bataclan promoting his latest album. But first, Thursday was International Women's Day. As well as celebrating women's achievement, it was also a chance to highlight efforts to balance their social, economic and political power with their male counterparts around the world. In a recent report, 3 African countries were in the top 10 globally in terms of the number of seats held by women in national lawmaking bodies in 2017. Rwanda is number 1 with over 60% of female parliamentarians. South Africa at 7 with over 42%, and Senegal is at number 9 with 41.8%. Overall, an historic 23.6% of the continent's MPs are women, but there is still a long way to go. Green Jabre from the International Parliamentary Union, the umbrella organisation for the world's parliaments, tells us more.
It's a sign of progress. It's a sign of a bigger space given to women in decision-making. It's also a sign of more inclusive decision-making on the continent. The African continent is one continent that has actually taken a lot of measures to proactively include women in politics. This movement was led by many post-conflict countries that took measures in order to build their country both on the potentials of men and women on an equal basis. And so they've led the way to much more inclusive participation of women in politics. But as you said, there's only 23.6% of women in parliaments in Africa, so we're still far away from parity.
And are there any examples on the African continent that you can cite for us of the way that you hope things will continue to go in the future?
Well, I think there are many signs. I think the recent elections in Senegal is a positive sign because the approach is to have much more of a partnership between men and women in politics. And the law that is adopted in Senegal, the quota law, is really one of 50-50 between men and women. I think this has really transformed the way politics are being done in Senegal. Rwanda is definitely a country that has led the way in showing that women can actually manage a country in a very constructive and useful way. I need to say that in many of those countries, Senegal, South Africa, parliament is also led by women. So these are really positive and good role models that I think will really encourage more women to run for politics and for more men and women to support women in politics.
Well, in some ironic timing, 24 hours before International Women's Day, the Ivorian government updated labour laws to stop women from doing certain jobs. They're now banned from anything that is deemed to exceed their ability and physical capability or present dangers which are likely to undermine morality, like working underground or in mines. Well, the government says it's a bid to protect female workers. Ivorian women, though, have been taking steps to look after each other when it comes to professional challenges. For the first time, the country has its own women's union. Our correspondents report.
The 8th of March, International Women's Day. But for these women on the streets of Abidjan, it's just an ordinary day spent trying to make ends meet.
If I get sick, I don't earn anything. So we're asking the government to give us some kind of insurance if anything happens to us. This union just for women, it's good. They will defend us.
A women's union by women and for women who for the first time are uniting to make their voices heard. It's a historic move in Ivory Coast. Organisers have very little means and face a long road ahead. Their small HQ is in the heart of Abidjan. Activists here take more than 30 calls a day.
Women are asking us about their rights. They want to know what their rights to medical coverage are, their rights as workers, especially since we are trade unionists. And by extension, they ask us about their different rights in their marital status, among others.
Mariatu Jiu heads the organization. She has more than 30 years' experience as an activist and trade unionist in a domain dominated by men.
If you look at this photo, you can see that there were only 3 women working in the executive committee. Our cultural mindset is such that in the current social climate, men do not want women to become like them. But today, everyone knows that women are capable.
The undertaking has given Ivory Coast its first post-independence female trade union leader.
Well, US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and the chairman of the African Union say that they've moved on from the controversy of earlier this year caused by US President Donald Trump's dismissal of countries on the continent. Tillerson's met with the AU chief on Thursday in Addis Ababa as he continues a week-long tour of Africa.
No one in Africa has forgotten Donald Trump's alleged comments last January about African nations being shithole countries. But during Rex Tillerson's visit to the African Union in Addis Ababa, the chairman of the AU's commission said progress was being made.
I and other African leaders believe this incident is behind us. I think that the visit here by the US Secretary of State Tillerson is evidence of the importance of the relationship between Africa and the United States.
Tillerson also met his Ethiopian counterpart. He addressed the issue of the state of emergency that was imposed in Ethiopia last month following anti-government protests.
While we appreciate the government's responsibility to maintain control and not allow violence to break out and harm innocent people as well who may become victims of violence, it is important that the country move on past the state of emergency as quickly as possible.
Tillerson also once again warned African countries not to forfeit their sovereignty when they accept loans from China. His Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, is also in Africa this week. And in Zimbabwe, he told journalists it was inappropriate for Tillerson to criticize China's relationship with African nations. This rivalry and the presence of both the US and Russia's top diplomats in Africa underlines that the continent's growing economy is increasingly attractive to these two major powers.
And finally, Seun Kuti, the youngest son of Nigerian afrobeat legend Fela Kuti, was in Paris this week playing gigs to promote his latest album. Our Shona Bhattacharya caught up with him as he spoke about his music, his fatherhood, and his philosophy to fans at the Bataclan Theatre.
Groove with a message. Seun Kuti had Parisians dancing to Afrobeat in the Bataclan concert hall, where 130 people were killed in a terrorist attack back in 2015.
It's great to see people gathered in here like this. It's a victory for music, victory for art lovers. Now we can still congregate in a place where the enemies of humanity try to perpetuate a lot of violence.
Black Times, Seun Kuti's newest album, is his fourth. Now that he's a father, the son of legendary Fela Kuti has a newer perspective on his legacy.
Understanding myself better, seeing my life not only from my perspective, but the kind of world that I'm leaving behind for someone else also comes into focus. That makes you deliberate, you know. And you realize also that you are a product of other people's struggles.
And for Seun Kuti, it's the struggles of the African leaders and thinkers of the 50s and 60s that inspire him. Now he says it's time for blacks the world over to unite.
The elitist narrative for us is to promote individualism, individual rights, individual freedoms, you know, which is detrimental to our own advancement as black people.
Following in his father's footsteps, Seun Kuti injects Afrobeat with a social conscience. This rhythm is not just for the body, but for the mind. and it's as relevant as ever.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks very much for joining us. Do so again. Take care.